Next, Paul Watson has spent a lifetime sailing into danger to protect life in the ocean and defending whales at sea. In 74, it's a life of activism that's led to run-ins with a number of countries, multiple detentions, Interpol Red Notices, the latest being from Japan, which has long hunted whales. And Paul's quest has been to expose illegal whaling activities, including when it's dressed up for research purposes. He was in detention for almost 5 months in Greenland by Danish police at the behest of Japan, which wanted him extradited, still does. Well, accused Paul of a crime from 14 years ago that revolves around his team firing raw butter stink bombs at the crew of one of their whaling research ships. Well, after that, he was released earlier this week without extradition going ahead, and he's returned to his family here in France. He's here with us tonight. Paul, great to have you with us, great to talk to you. We're going to talk about a lot of the detail, what's happened, the incident, what Japan are alleging. First of all, how are you? Because you've been back just a few days.
Very relieved to be back with my family just before Christmas.
Talk us through your time in detention, first of all, because 5 months in Greenland. I did hear you gave one interview by phone to, I think, BBC World Service, where you talked about you had some, it was kind of a bizarre situation, I think you described it as. You had some access to go and do some shopping in the day, and you had a beautiful view from your cell to see the Arctic foxes. And tell me about what it was like inside.
Well, from the outside, the prison looks like it's in the gulag. But once you're in the prison, I got this beautiful view of the fjord and the mountains. I could see whales out there. You're not allowed to go shopping, but they don't serve meals in this prison. They give you about 150 euros a week, and you go to the prison store, buy your own food, and then prepare your own meals. I
see. So you could, we've seen you outside talking to reporters. You were able to go and leave the detention facility briefly, were you? Or is this within the grounds that we're seeing here, that photo behind you?
Oh, no, this was after I was released. So.
Oh, I see. Yeah. OK, so you had to stay within the detention, yes. But you could communicate by phone, you could still send messages, because I know your messages were coming through. We were receiving some of your updates while you were still inside.
I was, but I was only allowed 10-minute phone call to my family every week. But media people could make interview appointments and schedule that. And so I did meet with numerous media people during that time.
Were you treated well?
Oh, yeah, I have no complaints about it. The prisoners were friendly, the prison guards were friendly, the police were friendly. It's all a very friendly place in Greenland.
I want to go back to your story, because this incident relates to 14 years ago, as I just said, and we're talking about, well, you'd set up Whale Wars, this essentially a real-life reality TV programme on the high seas of what your team back then, Sea Shepherd, were actually dealing with at the time, the antics you would try and do to stop whales being harpooned, being killed. Let's talk about the incident, because we have it on film. This is the moment of stink bombs being fired, the centre of Japan's arguments for one of your team in a catamaran, and let's have a look at what ensued.
When Chuck gave me the order to slow down the Nishinmaru, we had failed on the Shonan Maru. The Nishinmaru's got 4 times the power. I just saw this wasted exercise.
We come for you piece of
But in saying that, we did manage to slow them down a little bit, and it was a lot of fun.
That's definitely it. Sweet. Smell of napalm in the morning.
For 8 hours, Pete and his crew engaged the Nishinmaru, but could do little to make any lasting impact on the 8,000-ton factory ship.
So that's from the programme Whale War. So this is what Japan were using. They've said in a statement this week they regret your release. They accuse you of causing damage to that ship from that material we saw. But you say this is political. This is to stop you being a nuisance to them.
Well, the real problem for them was that we had a TV show that reached millions of people. It was exposing their illegal whaling operations in the Southern Ocean Whale Sanctuary. So we embarrassed Japan. That's what this is all about. That boat that you saw there, the black one, it was deliberately rammed and cut in half and destroyed. That was a $2 million ship destroyed. The 6 crew members were thrown into the ocean. One of the cameramen suffered broken ribs. They fired guns at us. They fired flashbang grenades at us. And they have there's no consequences legally for them.
And this was a research ship that was essentially there for surveillance to watch you, wasn't it?
Well, that particular ship is a factory ship, and they have research on the side, but it's really just a guise for commercial whaling. And I'm not the judge of that. They were taken to court in 2014 by the International Court of Justice in The Hague that ruled that it was illegal, but they continued to do that, ignored the court.
So under the auspices, ostensibly to research, as you say, the ICJ back in 2014 said this is not justified to be killing hundreds of whales under the banner of research. You mentioned what then happened, because this kind of gets to the thread, doesn't it, of the whole arc of the story here. We saw the moment of the actual incident, but what we'll see now is what you've just described, the Japanese whaling ship hitting your catamaran.
And it wasn't until the very last second that they did the sudden turn to starboard. And it was kind of like they came off two waves. The first wave, they turned maybe 20, 30 degrees. And then I'm thinking, this is going to be close. And then there was the second wave, and that just put them straight onto us. I never had time to get terrified. It was, the collision was been and gone before I had a chance to think about it. Just everyone's instincts kicked in. Interestingly, we all had the same idea, jump down in that cockpit area, and you saw it was just a mess of bodies. And everyone clinging on to each other.
So to follow this thread, what we're then seeing is, well, your colleague that we saw there, Pete Boutin, ends up in prison, or ultimately in Japan for a while, and you have suddenly, fairly short while after that, an Interpol Red Notice. So talk us through the sequence after that.
What happened after his vessel was destroyed, he wanted to then confront the captain who destroyed his ship. I actually advised him not to do this, but he said, look, I've got to do this.
As a citizen's arrest?
Yes, and he had every right to do it. So what he did was he boarded the Shonomaru number 2, and he calmly walked up to the wheelhouse door, knocked on the door, and they opened it, and he gave him, he says, this is a letter of complaint for what you did. And then they immediately grabbed him, hauled him all the way back to Japan on the ship, charged him with trespassing, assault, and obstruction of business. That was the other one. And then while he was under arrest, and they held him for 2 months in Japan, he made a deal with the prosecutor that if he blamed me and said if I ordered him to do that, they would give him a suspended sentence. And he did that. And after he was released, he said, well, I lied to the prosecutor. And he said, Paul Watson did not order me to do this. But Japan had everything they needed to come after me. And the charge was conspiracy to obstruct business, conspiracy to trespass.
So it takes us then 2 years later, I think, about 2012, you have this first Interpol Red Notice. So the idea is that they request an arrest, and that is up to each country to decide on how to determine that. Yeah. Now, you, at that point, at some point, you were living, staying sometime in, I think, in Ireland, in the UK, in France as well, and none of those countries decided to cooperate with that. It happened, as we said, later on in Greenland. It's probably worth you talking us through then what was happening with Japan, because after the ruling you mentioned, the ICJ, their research ship goes back to port in Japan, but you're still watching them under the Paul Watson organisation, and they come up with something like a multi-billion-dollar new ship heading back to the Antarctic, which eventually takes us back to what you were trying to do. I think I'm right to say you were going to Fire Island to Greenland to essentially refuel on the way to the Antarctic when you got arrested.
Well, we were on our way to the North Pacific by way of the Northwest Passage. We had to refuel in Greenland. And what Japan did was they gave a red notice specifically to Denmark, because anywhere else it didn't come up. But Denmark has a vested interest because they have the killing of pilot whales and dolphins in the Faroe Islands, which we've been opposing. So I found myself being arrested in Greenland. And, I was quite confident. We had everything on film. It was all documented. All we had to do was look at the evidence to see that the charges weren't valid. It took them 2.5 months to even look at the evidence. They just refused to do it. So every month I would come back into court and they said, remand them for another 28 days, another 28 days, another 28 days. Finally, finally, on my birthday, on December 2nd, they said that the Attorney General of Denmark would make a decision within 2 weeks. And that decision came, and the decision was to release me, not extradite me.
So all the while you had more than 100,000 people sign a signature for your release. You had celebrities, many celebrities fighting for your cause as well. Martin Sheen, the artist Moby, a number of Brigitte Bardot. Also, you'd written to President Macron as well, who'd shown support with rhetoric. Tell me about whether that factored in, and what factored in, do you think, to your ultimate release?
Well, I think that, with the support from President Macron, the support from President Lula of Brazil, the president of French Polynesia, all of this factored into this. We had an excellent legal team that Lamia Samlami of Sea Shepherd France put together, and celebrities around the world, Jane Goodall, there's James Cameron, Sylvia Earle, even the Pope sent a message. So I think that the support was overwhelming. I received about 4,500 letters while I was in prison, and about 70% were from France. I tried to write as many as possible, or answer as many as possible, especially from children all around the world. I had a few letters saying they wondered why Santa Claus was in prison.
Can I ask, do you remember what the Pope said in a message?
No, I just think that he made his views known to the Danish government. So
at this point, you're coming out, but it's worth saying to the audience, I just want to explain that this is something that you've dealt with in a career, basically a lifetime's work of a number of authorities. Costa Rica, I think we can mention, and amongst, you've been detained elsewhere, you've had issues with the Icelandic government. But I want to take you back to the mid-70s. This is when basically we're going to see Paul right at the start of his career, TV career as well, working, I think, one of the key influencers starting Greenpeace. And this is what happened when basically you were almost killed by a harpoon that came from a Soviet ship that was striking a whale. Let's take a look.
The guy must have been a good shot, is all I can figure out, or else we were awfully lucky, whatever. He kind of waited till we went down on a swell and the whales came up, and then he fired over our head, so it missed us by maybe about 6 or 7 feet. To this point, we've been dealing with live whales, and everyone was in love with whales, and here's this slaughtered teenage whale lying in the water, and everybody the emotions just got pretty crazy at that stage.
What do you say, Paul? How long do you think it is? How long? About 18 feet.
So Watson jumped on it, and as a matter of fact, the whale's eye was open, so he just pushed the lid and closed its eye.
When you say on board, you mean you jumped on the top of a whale. What was that like?
Well, it was sad. I mean, there was a harpoon lower in the back, and the blood was coming through, so the blood was coming on my hands.
When you look back at that, Paul, and you talk about the moment, a number of people actually, anti-whaling community, talk about when they see the significance, that sentient moment of seeing the eyes. Even in Moby Dick, of course, that significance of the beauty, the power of the whale, the sadness, the connection. When you look back at that and think, what have you achieved, in your mission to try to stop it happening? Is it better now, or is the situation worse?
Since 1975, when that took place, I think about 90% of the world's whaling has been shut down. Over that time, we stopped Australia, Spain, South Korea, South Africa. All of these nations no longer whale. And as of 2019, for the first time in 200 years, there was no whaling in pelagic waters. So it's been a very successful campaign. We've saved literally tens of thousands of whales during that time. Now we have to stop Iceland from resuming whaling. We have to stop Norway and Japan.
Japan in particular, how do you feel about that? Do you feel that you would like to see some accountability, that it's come to nothing, that you've spent 5 months in detention for something that you clearly see appears to be, from the fact that it's been dropped, a political way of getting you out of the way?
Well, they did drop whaling in the Southern Ocean in 2019. They just want to go back on them. We now have to try and stop them from going back. So I'm hoping that, over the next few years, we'll be able to shut them down completely. And the way to do this, I've always said that the most powerful weapon in the world is a camera. Exposing them, constantly exposing them. In fact, when they arrested me in Greenland, it actually backfired on them, because our intention was to focus international attention on their illegal whaling operations. By arresting me, they did just that, and much more powerfully than if they hadn't done that. So they actually did us a great favor.
A couple of thoughts. One is that I've heard you refer to a number of times as an inverted Captain Ahab, that you're not hunting the whale, your hunt is for those hunting the whale with a ferocity. To an extent where we've seen language in the past coming from the likes of Greenpeace, which you split from a couple of years after we just saw that image, that don't like your direct action, that didn't comment and in the past used similar language to the Japanese government. I think the term ecoterrorist was used. Tell me how you feel about that, and did you find any support from Greenpeace while in detention?
I think Greenpeace made a statement, yes, but the thing is, I don't mind being called an eco-terrorist because it's not true. I've never caused an injury to anybody. I have no criminal record. I've never been convicted of a crime. And when people say, "Are you an eco-terrorist?" I always say, well, "No, I don't. I've never worked for Monsanto, so no, I'm not." Our philosophy has always been one of what I call aggressive nonviolence. Let's aggressively intervene, but we're not going to hurt anybody, and we never have. But we also don't protest. We intervene against illegal activities, illegal whaling. So there's a big difference between, Greenpeace's approach is completely different. But, I've always been accused of being too controversial and too confrontational, but I think that that's necessary. The strength of any movement is in diversity. Therefore, the strength of this movement has to be in diversity. There's me on one end, and then there's people who are just writing letters, but it all points to the same end. It doesn't matter whether your approach is education, litigation, legislation, or direct intervention. It all works towards the same cause.
Do you think now you're being left alone by the Japanese government? There's no sense that you're going to be tracked continually, is there? And also, I guess the bigger question is, what now for you? Is this, Paul Watson now saying, OK, time to hang up my boots at 74, or are you still ready to go out and drop anchor again?
I've never envisioned retirement, and Japan is even more determined now because they're even more embarrassed now. One of the things we're going to do in the new year is to go to Lyon and confront Interpol directly, and not just for my sake, but also the fact that Interpol is being used as a political tool by many countries to stop people they disagree with, not for any crimes. And my case has been cited by a European committee, parliamentary committee, investigating Interpol as a sample of abuse of Interpol's power.
Very interesting, because we heard from a source who has close contacts with senior officials at Interpol, and their view of what was going on with the Danish government was that they didn't have to, as the Danish government had said, follow the principle of the arrest warrant. It was for them to decide. They had a degree of flexibility, to which I mentioned Ireland, UK, France decided not to do. And is that an area that you're looking at, that when people see it's an international red notice, it's easy to think that's an automatic arrest warrant?
They do. I think Denmark was certainly aware that they didn't have to do this, but they also have a mutual interest with Japan, and that is the protection of the pilot whale and dolphin kills in the Faroe Islands, which, by the way, is illegal. It's a violation of the Berne Convention. You cannot kill cetaceans under European Union laws. Now, the Faroese will say, well, we're exempt because we're a territory of Denmark. But the thing is that 85% of those Faroese hold Danish passports. They shouldn't be allowed to enjoy the benefits of EU membership if they're not going to abide by EU regulations and laws.
Very briefly, because we have about 30 seconds, but I would like to know, when you look at the situation now and you have you've had this time to reflect on what's happened to you, are you trying to... You don't bear a personal grudge with Japan? Are you looking at them particularly with the whaling at the moment, or is it more general than that?
Well, I have a lot of support in Japan, but we're against the Japanese whaling industry, which is a criminal enterprise. That's what we're opposed to. And we have a lot of Japanese people who agree with us on that.
Paul, pleasure to talk to you. And great to see you out of detention as well. Paul Watson, anti-whaling campaigner here on France 24, and a happy Christmas to you as well. Stay with us here on France 24. We'll be back in just a moment.